Welcome everyone to another session of answer writing program video discussion. As you know that there are questions uploaded every day on Vajiram's portal, 3 questions to be specific, and out of the same 2 questions are from static. Today those questions are going to be from GS2 International Relations, specifically from India and its neighborhood relations and effect of policies, politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest and Indian diaspora. So that is something we will be looking at for the 2 questions, and there will be 1 question based on current affair. Now let us see those questions. The very first question is about think and relate East is the new way to go beyond lookist and actist. So over here we will talk about how exactly there are certain kind of limitations with respect to lookist and actist policy, and the Indian diplomacy should now go towards think and relate East. In the second question, we will be talking about how free and open Indo-Pacific initiative of Japan is complementary to India's Indo-Pacific Oceans initiative. The directive is comment, so we will be exploring multiple directions. In the third question, it's about outer space, what exactly is outer space, and we have to talk about problems associated with the space activities and relevance of international cooperation in managing outer space effectively. So now let us see the question number 1. Question number 1. Think and relate East is the new way to go beyond lookist and actist. Discuss. In this question, the very first thing in the introduction, you can discuss a little bit brief about lookist and actist. As we have witnessed the evolution of India's diplomatic relationship as well as policy, foreign policy, lookist was initiated in 1991. It was basically trying to make sure that the northeastern states as well as the eastern neighbor are inculcated in India's development narrative. So that was in 1991, and Act East was extended version of this, which in 2014 was initiated to ensure further development. So if you can see, these are the neighbors that can be considered as part of India's lookist and actist policy. We saw multiple challenges with respect to these policies, and that is why we are talking about think and relate East. So in the body 1, we will be talking about that why we need to ensure that we need to go beyond lookist and actist policy. So over here we will list out certain kind of challenges and some failures. So firstly, there are certain implementation challenges with respect to the actist and lookist policy. We have witnessed that India-Myanmar trilateral highway, which was supposed to be get finished by 2015, is still in 2023 delayed. So that is something you can talk about implementation challenges. You can talk about trade balance over here, that despite India opening in the market, India is still not able to access the markets of eastern countries. So over here you can write about how there is a trade deficit of $25 billion. The third is limited focus on northeastern India. The idea was to ensure that the northeastern states of India act as bridge for our foreign policy. However, despite lookist and actist policy initiatives, we have seen limited development in this region. So you can talk about the third point as limited focus on northeastern India. The fourth point is growing influence of China. We have seen multiple initiatives from China's side as well, like BRI. Apart from that, we have also seen that how China is actively participating in multilateral partnership programs such as RCEP, which India did not took participation. So China is actively trying to make sure that their regional influence is dominating, and that definitely affects India's interest. So that way there are the limitations of lookist and actist, and for the same reason India should move towards think and relate East. When we are talking about think and relate East, we are ensuring that we are not just connected economically or diplomatically, we are also connected socially and culturally to ensure that our historical bonds are reinvigorated. So let us see the benefits of think and relate East. All whatever cultural ties we are looking for will definitely lead to higher economic opportunities, as we are ensuring that proper integration of markets are there. And the second, regional influence, as there would be sufficient efforts from Indian side to ensure ties are strengthened. India can also augment its regional influence, not just in the northeast or the eastern side, but we can talk about a bigger picture over here. It's Indo-Pacific. Apart from that, we also have to understand this from security point of angle. We have seen multiple issues with respect to insurgency. We have issues of drugs, organized crime. So making sure we have better connections, better relationship with the eastern neighborhood countries, we can ensure security cooperations. Fourth is knowledge exchange and innovation. Over here we are talking about exchange of information, exchange of research, innovation that can definitely augment the ties between multiple nations. Then we talk about people to people connection. Over here we are ensuring there is exchange of cultural ideas. Apart from that, we are making also sure that there is student exchange program, such as education initiatives can be taken in that direction. So people to people connection can also help with respect to think and relate East. So that is the body 2. Now coming towards the end, the conclusion. Over here you have the opportunity to add that how ensuring that we are including the neighborhood countries in the narrative of not just India's development but also overall development of the Indo-Pacific region. So that is something that you can inculcate in the conclusion of the answer. Now let us see the model answer and make sure how we can use this for our answer writing. In the introduction you talk about Lucas, actist, and talk about what is the objectives and all. We can also mention the timeline. Then in the need to go beyond, you talk about certain issues and you can also give certain examples. It's always beneficial to add certain kind of justification like data where we mentioned about the trade deficit. That way you can support your argument. In the body 2, you have multiple dimensions and you can talk about different aspects of the same, either through expanding the argument or through justified facts. And in the conclusion, you can add this dimension of Indo-Pacific region and how think and relate East going to support the idea of Indo-Pacific region. So that's it for question number 1. Let's move to question number 2. Free and open Indo-Pacific initiative of Japan and India's Indo-Pacific Ocean initiative are complementary to each other. Comment. So the question is talking about a specific policy of a developed nation, Japan, which is regarding to free and open Indo-Pacific initiative and how India's policy of Indo-Pacific Ocean initiative, they are complementary to each other. The question directive is comment. So you have the opportunity to talk about certain kind of convergence, divergence and way forward. In the introduction, you can talk about the definition of Indo-Pacific region. Over here you can start how the Indo-Pacific region starts from East Africa and extends till West North America. So this is the region we are talking about, right? So this entire region encompasses in the Indo-Pacific region. You can also talk about objectives of both the policy initiatives. As we have seen that in the pillars of Indo-Pacific Ocean initiatives of India encompasses maritime security, ecology, resources, capacity building, disaster, science and tech, and trade. Whereas the free and open Indo-Pacific initiative talks about freedom of navigation, trade, rule of law, economic prosperity, and commitment of peace and stability. Now, this is something that you can inculcate in introduction, add these dimensions through mind map, as these are secondary information. For primary information, we'll go to the body part 1. You talk about how there are certain complementary components of both the initiatives. Firstly, you talk about how both of the policies, they have focus on maritime security. We have seen that security is the prime factor that's connecting both India's and Japan's initiative. Then you talk about maritime connectivity, how Japan is trying to make sure there is connectivity with the African nations, with the entire Indo-Pacific region under Free and Open Indo-Pacific initiative. Now that's Japan's push towards more trade as well in that region, which also is aspect of India's policy. In the part of capacity building and information sharing, as we know that region itself has lot of potential for development, sharing of information along with capacity building of the local population can not just help India and Japan, but also the entire Indo-Pacific region. And the last is cooperation with respect to disaster management. We have seen multiple disasters in that region, not just artificial but also human made, not just artificial but also natural disasters. So having such kind of coordination is kind of the priority, so that there are certain kind of mitigation as well. So disaster management is common to both. Now let us talk about certain differentiating components, certain divergences. So maritime ecology and maritime resources. This over here is primarily India's focus through Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, whereas India's initiative does not talk about the same, whereas Japan's initiative explicitly talks about the airspace as well. Even with respect to global health and food security, the initiative of India does not have the primary focus on certain kind of aspect, whereas the Japan's initiative is explicit about it. When we are talking about cyber security and digital connectivity, again Japan's initiative is pushing towards certain kind of measures for cyber security as well as certain kind of investment for digital connectivity, whereas India's Indo-Pacific is more about the objectives that we saw in the introduction. So that is the body 2. Now let's see the conclusion. The conclusion over here, you can talk about certain challenges we have seen, or you can also talk about that how recent 2020-22 joint summit in March reflects that both India and Japan are committed for Indo-Pacific region's prosperity. Or else you can also talk about certain challenges like challenge with respect to China, North Korea. So those are certain kind of aspects that you can add in the conclusion. So that's it. Now let's see the model answer and understand how we can structure answer in a better way. In the introduction, you talk about both the policy measures and talk about how they are ensuring they are tackling common challenges. You can also add the joint summit aspect over here as well as in the conclusion. However, you can create a better narrative through answer. In the first body, you talk about the convergence. In the second body, you talk about the divergence and explicitly mention where there are certain kind of disconnectivities. And in the conclusion, you talk about challenges, China's dominance, North Korea threat. Also, maritime pollution is something that you can add in the conclusion. You can also talk about how this region generates 1/3 of world's economic output. Therefore, policy measures like Japan's initiative and India's initiative are much needed. So that's it for question number 2. Now let's move on to question number 3. Now question number 3 is recent current affair based question. Outer space, the final frontier, holds the promise of unity among nations, yet it also poses the challenge of preserving the cosmic commons for generation to come. In the light of the statement, highlight the problems associated with space activities and relevance of international cooperation in managing outer space effectively. So this question is basically about outer space. So you can start the introduction with defining outer space. Over here you can add the concepts like Karman line and how 100 kilometer from the surface is certain kind of defining boundary for outer space. So that is something you can add in the introduction. In the body 1, you can talk about problems, as we are going to talk about the first aspect is problem with space activities. The very first space issue is space traffic and risk of collision. We have witnessed rising amount of space activities and launches especially with respect to satellites. In 2012 or 13, we saw around 200 satellites launched per year, which have now risen almost more than 10 to 12 times to 2400 satellite per year. So 200 to 2400 something in 2013 to 2022. So as we are witnessing higher number of satellites in the orbit, there is also possibility of collision and thus space traffic. So that is going to be definitely impacting another point, which is menace of space debris. So this can be interconnected in that way that now we are also witnessing issues with respect to space debris. Debris are basically dead elements of space, any kind of satellites or bodies that were planted before. So those debris can definitely obstruct further space activities as well. So that is the menace of space debris. In lack of international coordination, you can talk about that how every nation has their own way of interpreting space. Despite there are certain treaties, still there is a lot of subjective interpretation, and thus the cooperation coordination issue is also of a challenge. Then you talk about space warfare. We have also witnessed that how space warfare can be a kind of challenge, and multiple nations are ensuring that they are developing certain kind of technology that can be misused. So space warfare is also one of the problem with respect to outer space activities. And the last is notable gaps in the outer space treaty. The last outer space treaty explicitly was in 1966. We also saw Moon Treaty in 1979. Now you do understand that because of such kind of time gap, and also we have witnessed that how many countries like India have developed their space activities and now are prominent player where their voice also matters. So there must be certain kind of updation of the new policy to ensure all the gaps are bridged. So those are the problems. Now let us see why there is certain degree of relevance with respect to international cooperations. First, we have to understand that outer space is shared resource, and thus through international cooperation we can ensure that the management of those resources is fair and justified. Then we can talk about conflict prevention, as there is proper standards, proper ways to ensure conflict resolution through cooperation. Multiple nations can share their subjective interpretation and ensure that they are working for the common good. Third, space debris mitigation. As we have seen that every nation is definitely in a race to ensure that they have multiple satellites to ensure different kind of information access. Because of certain high degree of launches, we have the issue of debris. Now, if the nation they coordinate well, they can ensure that debris are eliminated, and thus they can also help their satellite and multiple space activity programs. Fourth, scientific advancement. We have seen that how International Space Station has led to multiple scientific advancement. So you can combine the shared resource management as in collaboration with scientific advancement through international cooperation. The last is peaceful use of the space. As we talked about the challenge of space warfare, if there is certain kind of coordination, collaboration, there will be definitely avenues for peaceful activities of the space. So that's it for the challenges. Now let us talk about the conclusion. In the conclusion, you can talk about how there is need for the fresh treaty. In 2023, even the United Nations body talked about the same. So that must be ensured to ensure that the outer space, the resources of the outer space are shared in justified and in fair manner, and every nation has the voice and share with respect to policy making. So that's it for question number 3. Let us see the model answer and see how we can make our answer better. So you can talk about the definition of outer space: 100 kilometers command line. You can talk about the problems, you can give multiple dimensions with respect to certain data points. Apart from that, in the second body, again you can talk about multiple dimensions and give certain data points, right? Scientific advancement, you can talk about GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, Barrow. You can also add India's Insight series, right? So that is something you can talk about in the relevance, and in the conclusion you can talk about the 2023's UN Nations proposal for fresh outer space treaty. You can also add how Artemis Accord that happened in 2022 can also be a kind of a benchmark where multiple nations can participate and update the accord in democratic way. So that is something you can add in the conclusion. So that's it for today's video discussion. Thank you very much.